Welcome to one of our vlogs from St. Mark's Episcopal in Dalton, Georgia, and all those joining us from Facebook and YouTube. You can't tell it from this angle, but I'm at the foot of Mount Sinai. Unfortunately, not the one in the Holy Land, but the one in Whitfield County, Georgia. I'm here today because I want to reference a Sunday school lesson we had last week at St. Mark's. It was Pentecost, but we're also talking about Shavuot, the Jewish commemoration when they commemorate their grain harvest, but also more importantly, the giving of their law, the giving of the Torah and the Mitzvah and the Talmud, the oral traditions of Judaism. And in that story, we're talking about the 19th chapter of Exodus, where a lot happens. But 19th chapter of Exodus, God is going to give the law to the Hebrew people. And Moses gathers up the base of Mount Sinai, in the 19th chapter of Exodus. And God's going to speak to them and give them the law. Well, the people are so afraid because the mountain is covered with clouds and fog, and God speaks to them in thunder, and is so loud and scary that the people are afraid they might die if they hear God's voice. So they beg Moses to intercede for them, and Moses does, and Moses receives the law, passes on in there, and it's quite a story and really worth reading the 19th chapter. Well, in our voice, people hear the voice of God. And I thought about that this week because on May 30th was the anniversary of back in 1431 when Joan of Arc was executed by burning for claiming to have heard the voice of God. It was actually a political trial, and she didn't stand a chance, and she actually repented, but she was still burned at the stake because of some of the things she did, but it was very political. But also this past week I was looking at on Showtime, one of their movies or series about Vernon Howell, who changed his name to David Koresh and led a group of Branch Davidians near Waco, Texas, and the drama that happened with the standoff in that area, and that so many people were killed. It was a very tragic story. But he was convinced that he heard the voice of God, and convinced many other people that he heard the voice of God. And it had very tragic outcomes on that, and still a very controversial issue today. There are many people in the Bible who heard the voice of God or even conversed with God, going all the way back to Adam and Eve. And then, of course, Abraham and Jacob and Moses and Job had several conversations with God, but goes on with all the prophets. And then even the New Testament, Jesus heard the voice of God. And also Paul heard the voice of Jesus, or the voice of God, and probably some others too. Some of the others, and John, writing in the book of Revelation, claims to have heard the voice of God. But in our sophisticated time, we have someone going around saying that God is speaking to them, they're hearing the voice of God. We're very skeptical and suspicious of that, which is kind of strange because ironically, many Christians that I've speak to, when you kind of get down past and talking about their issues, they say they wish that God would speak to them or reveal himself to them more clearly and tell them what to expect in their lives and what some of the answers to the great questions are. So people really seek the revelation of God and for God to speak to them. I believe that even if not in clear speak, that God is constantly and continually revealing himself to us. I'm not learned enough or wise enough to tell someone else how to get God to clearly communicate with them. I don't know, and I don't pretend to know. But I think there's a lot of truth in one of the instructions in the Episcopal Church about what to do prior to the service when we get ready to worship. And it says, prior to the service, keep respectful silence so that you and others may have a quiet preparation. Be quiet enough for God to speak to you. Be quiet enough for God to speak to you. I think there's a lot of truth in that. People ask me sometimes, where do you see God? Now, honestly answer that, well, I see God whenever I am able to patiently and reverently and with all look for God. I see God where I look for God. But I have to do so with reverence and patience and faith, all that. So I would suggest that to see, hear, or feel God, that we must seek to patiently, faithfully, reverently, and with all, seek God's revelation. God reveals himself to us in creation, in history, in scripture certainly, in science. But mostly God reveals himself through others. who, like ourselves, are created in God's image. Where we seek, we shall find. And for this Pentecost season, we can say, thanks be to God. Alleluia.